Hello, my name is Robbe. Today I will be presenting SelectVisAR, Selective Visualization of Virtual Environments in Augmented Reality, which is the work of my colleague Jihae and myself under supervision of Professor Adalberto Simeone. This work is concerned with cross-reality interactions, which are interactions between users in different realities. We often describe these realities through Milgram's reality virtuality continuum, which ranges from the real environment to the virtual environment and all the realities in between. For example, VR will be situated on the right of the spectrum, while AR is more located towards the center, being a combination of both real and virtual elements. And then the physical reality is all the way to the left, and users in the physical reality are often referred to as external or non-immersed users. The interaction between non-immersed users and VR users has been researched before, for example in Share VR, which presents a system involving a spectator screen, a floor projection, and the handheld monitor to enable non-immersed users to interact with VR users. This system was successfully used to implement a variety of games. Another approach is presented in face display. In this work, a number of small screens were mounted to the head-mounted display of the VR user, allowing the external users to see into the virtual environment. And then external users were also able to interact with the virtual environment through mid-air gestures or through touchscreen interactions. We are concerned with interactions between VR and AR users, which is an area which has been researched less extensively before. In symmetric collaborative interactions, symmetric and asymmetric interactions were compared. For example, symmetric interactions involving either two AR or two VR users compared to the asymmetric interaction with one VR user and one AR user. The task that was investigated was the collaborative manipulation of small 3D objects. Another work is ObserveR, which presents a system in which a teacher using AR can visualize a group of students who are using VR. Different ways of presenting this visualization were presented, for example, first-person view, world in miniature, and world scale. First-person view and world in miniature were displayed above the VR user's avatar, whereas world scale scaled the size of the virtual environment to the size of the physical environment which was available to the AR user. In our study, we will investigate how to visualize a VR user and their virtual environment to an AR user, while providing enough information for the AR user to understand what the VR user is doing, while also not providing too much information so that the AR user can still have a clear view of the real environment. We will do this by investigating different ways of filtering this information, which can be dynamic, changing over time, or a static selection of objects. We will also investigate different scales of this visualization, for example, room scale or a scaled down view. But before answering these questions, let's first take a look at the VR simulation which we used as an example in our study. We implemented a VR task which involved the VR user being a bartender, where they could manipulate virtual objects such as fruits, bottles, and glasses in order to create a cocktail consisting of a simplified 3-ingredient recipe. Now the question remains of how to visualize this task to the AR user who is co-located with the VR user. For this, we implemented 4 different techniques. On room scale, we have everything, proximity, and interactive, and on the 1 in 5 scale, we have the Dollhouse. Everything is symmetrical between VR and AR users, with them being able to see the same parts of the virtual environment. Proximity is a cylindrical filter which follows the VR user around, so that the AR user can always see the area of the virtual environment which is close to the VR user. Interactive is a static predetermined selection of interactive objects which we considered to be a minimal amount of information for the AR users to still be able to understand the actions that the VR user is performing. And finally, there's Dollhouse, which is a 1 in 5 scale model of the virtual environment in which the AR user can only see the VR user's avatar, while the physical VR user is standing off to the side of the visualization. Then we evaluated these 4 techniques in a user study. Participants first filled in a demographics form and had an introduction to the HoloLens 2. Then the researcher performed the VR bartender task, which had a number of extra events scripted in, such as dropping a piece of fruit or moving a bottle without pouring. The AR user was then instructed to look out for these events, and so that they could indicate them after the observation was complete. In this way, we could analyze how well they were able to observe the VR user's actions. And they also filled in after each trial, filled in an SUS presence questionnaire and a simulator sickness questionnaire. The study followed a within subjects design, with each technique being presented to each participant in a counterbalanced order for a total of 4 trials. After each trial, participants could indicate a preference of which techniques they found most useful in completing their task, as well as they were interviewed on why they found certain techniques more useful than others. A total of 13 participants participated in this study. The ranking they were able to give at the end indicated that they preferred interactive and proximity the least. From the interviews, it became clear that for proximity, the lack of awareness of the invisible part of the virtual environment was the reason for this. And for interactive, they missed the bar counter as a point of reference in the scene, and they are also very distracted by the fact that there were floating objects. Event recognition was analyzed by calculating a competence score, which is the true positive rate minus the false positive rate, where 1 is a perfect score, which indicated that a participant indicated the correct events and only the correct events. There wasn't any significant difference between the techniques, with interactive scoring the highest, followed by proximity, everything, and Dollhouse scoring the lowest. Based on this feedback, we designed 2 follow-up techniques. The first is Spotlight, which replaced proximity, and Context, which replaces interactive. Spotlight addresses the need to remain aware of the out-of-focus part of the environment by representing this part of the environment as outlines. This way, the users could stay aware of the out-of-focus part of the environment without it hindering their view of the real world. Context improves on the need for more context. Participants had an interactive by adding the supporting furniture to the interactive objects, which are the bar counter and the sink. These techniques were then evaluated in a study with a similar procedure as the first study, alongside everything and Dollhouse. We had another 13 participants, and this time Spotlight was preferred the least of all techniques. Participants cited the lack of control over the visualization as the reason for this, as they didn't like not being able to decide themselves which part of the environment they were able to see. We also found a minimal difference between context and everything, with not only in preference, but also in the interviews where participants said that they also experienced the techniques as being very similar, and some participants even expressed that they were not able to tell the difference between them. We analyzed event recognition in the same way as in the first study. This time there also was no significant difference, with context scoring the highest, followed by everything and Spotlight, with Dollhouse again scoring the lowest. On the effect of selection, we found that everything and context are experienced as being very similar, and that dynamic selection was not preferred, in our case proximity and Spotlight, because of the lack of control participants had over this visualization. Then on the event recognition task, no significant differences were found between any of these selections, with the values being about the same. On the effect of scale, we found that Dollhouse provided users with a better overview, but also that sometimes users found it to be too small, which is also supported by the Dollhouse scoring the lowest in the event recognition task on both the studies, albeit not significantly. So in conclusion, if an overview is preferred, we recommend using a scaled-down Dollhouse perspective. Users generally preferred static over dynamic selections, and we found a good static selection in our context technique, which included interactive objects and their immediate context. However, further research is required to generalize this approach to different environments. Thank you for listening to this presentation on SelectVisAR, Selective Visualization of Virtual Environments in Augmented Reality.